I'm more like a tailor right now than I am a boat builder. It's like I'm making a pair of new clothes for my trawler.
Hi, I'm Joe, and welcome to MotorCity Boat Works. Let's get to work. Welcome back to the Werks. This episode is the second in a series about how I installed headliner material on the inside of my pocket trawler. This is a complex project requiring a lot of steps and a lot of forethought and planning. The execution has to be just right in order to get a fine finished project. This episode, I'm going to be talking about the delicate process for making patterns for all the headliner pieces that are going to go inside my pocket trawler. So you can see here, we kind of cleaned out the shop, we put the dinghy away outside, and now I've gone ahead and set up a very large table as high as I can possibly get it so that I have kind of a work surface to lay things out and start looking at these patterns. I want to take a moment to give a shout out to one of our fans. Tony is a fan of the show. He's also an Albin 27 owner and a member of the new Albin 27 Owners Club. Tony gave me a lot of advice on how to do this project. He's already done it. He did his aft cabin, really came out very well. It's because of his notes and his advice that I really decided I could go ahead and attempt this project. He did an amazing job, and I couldn't have done it without him. The process, I think, is going to go something like this. I have to make a pattern for the aft cabin and the forward cabin for all parts of the inside of the cabin where the headliner is going to go. This will determine how many pieces of headliner we have in there. Could be 3, 4, 5, I don't know, or more. And they've got to butt up against each other and look just right. In the aft cabin alone, it looks like there's going to be 9 pieces of headliner. The headliner goes around the cabin. At the stern of the boat, there's a little bump that comes out. That gets its own piece of material. And then up underneath the insides of the midships bulkhead, there's more headliner around the berths. In the forward cabin, it should be much simpler. There should only be 3 very large pieces of headliner. There are lots of different shapes, surfaces inside the forward and the aft cabin. It's really 3D, right? There's tight corners and bumps and curves and radiuses, no straight lines anywhere. It's on multiple planes, wrapping around the sides of the cabin and then down under the elbow on each side. All of this is going to require very detailed pattern making.
I don't get compensated in any way for mentioning any brands or products on my YouTube channel. I have no sponsors. I get no compensation.
In a previous episode, I talked about pattern making and different techniques that you can use to make a pattern to cover a bulkhead. On 3-dimensional surfaces, my preference is usually to do some type of a paper pattern, but it's a very tedious process, and paper has some limitations. It tears often, it breaks down, it can be very difficult to hold it in place while you're trying to get uptight inside of the corners. I started searching for another material, something other than paper that would allow me to hold a pattern in place while I trimmed the edges. And I came up with the idea of using some type of contact paper. Now, normal contact paper is not very robust. It has a tendency to tear or stretch. It doesn't really work. And it only comes in rolls that are 12 or 24 inches wide. The answer to my pattern making problems is a type of peel and stick wallpaper. It's called FunStick. It's kind of a vinyl material. It has a non-permanent sticky adhesive. It's repositionable. You can draw on it. It's about 5 mil thick. It comes in a variety of colors and it's different sizes. A 36-inch roll by 20 inches is about $50. I think I'm going to make the patterns out of a combination of this heavy-duty vinyl contact paper and regular brown construction paper. Hopefully, using the two, I'll be able to come up with a good pattern and then transfer that over to the hull blanket headliner material. Let's talk about some equipment you need. Right off the bat, you need something to measure with. You need a sewing tape measure. This is a flexible tape measure, just like a tailor uses. It'll help go around all the corners and get in the nooks and crannies. You also need a regular tape measure. You're going to need some markers, some pencils, a couple of good utility knives. You're going to need some pins for pinning the fabric. You're going to need blue masking tape, duct tape. You'll need a couple heavy objects to serve as paperweights, and a couple pairs of scissors. In particular, you're going to need some Japanese fabric shears. These are special scissors that are designed to be able to cut on a flat surface accurately.
First thing I do is I cut out rough dimensions of this material. I'll walk you through the steps of how I make one of these patterns.
Think of the FunStick like giant pieces of duct tape. You're going to take that into the boat and use it to begin mocking up what the pattern will look like. Anytime I'm dealing with a rolled material, I always try to smooth it out ahead of time. It makes handling easier. I experimented several different ways, and it ultimately turned out that it's easier to peel the paper before you get on the boat. It's too likely that the FunStick will wrap around itself and everything will turn into a big sticky mess. At this stage, it really doesn't matter where the FunStick goes. You're just trying to cover one of the headliner segments and build the pattern. Be sure to cover the entire pattern area with the FunStick material. Mark any seams and cutouts. You'll trim those later.
Because the pattern moves each time you put it up and take it down, put it up, take it down, you got to have some reference points. So I'll create a reference point like right here and right here and right here.
At this point, I take the FunStick material off the boat and I apply it to some brown paper. Once I have the FunStick adhered to the brown paper, I'll trim up any cutouts or seams to get the overall shape. Doesn't matter how accurate the pattern is at this point. We'll fine-tune everything later on using the masking tape when we go back and reapply the paper and FunStick pattern to the bulkhead.
So now that we got the pattern done, you can see I cut this out. Basically, we've got our vinyl on the front. It's stuck to the cardboard paper on the back. We got a piece that we can move around now, and it's not going to tear. And we'll go back up and now put it in place and kind of resize it and marry it up to the next panel there and see what happens. So we'll leave this till we get up there and see what exactly is going on.
Once I'm back on the boat, I stick the paper and FunStick pattern up on the bulkhead using the duct tape. And then I begin to pay particular attention to the seams. These have to be straight and they have to be into the corner as far as possible in order to try and hide where the material comes together later on. I use the masking tape to add material to the pattern, and I use the scissors and the utility knife to trim away excess material. The idea is to get as tight and precise a pattern as possible. This is kind of an intermediate step. I still have to put up all the pieces of pattern and see how they fit together. Now I can understand you might be tempted to skip all these steps and just go with a straight, simple paper pattern, hoping that everything works out in the end. But I'm going to tell you, the problem with doing a paper pattern for such a large project as this is that over time you'll lose confidence in how accurate your patterns actually are. They'll become damaged over time. And by the time you reach the end of the project, when you're actually transferring things over to the headliner material, well, your patterns will no longer really be that good. Trust me when I say you need to take the time up front to create really good patterns that will last the length of the project and well beyond, so that you know everything's going to fit properly.
Hey, I just want to take a moment to thank all of our supporters and fans
all of our subscribers and those of you who are supporting us on Patreon. If you're new to the channel and you're just now checking us out, the single most important thing that you can do is hit that subscribe button. Tell a friend about MotorCity Boat Works. This channel would not be possible without your support. Thank you.
So let me show you this. I've made 3 patterns so far. This is the patterns right here. This is the center pattern. And what I'm trying to do is come up with a way that the patterns meet together very, very tight. They got to be high enough that the ceiling panels will meet this edge and cover up that seam. And they've got to be tight enough over here that the 2 pieces of fabric can come together in the corner, you know, look almost seamless, right? In the corner right here. So we got to have a pattern that follows this. Of course, none of this is square. Nothing is smooth. And nothing is on the same plane. There's all kinds of undulations and movements and stuff underneath here. So it's caused me to make a pattern, put the patterns up here, see how they dry fit together, trim them some more, and which is the blue here. The blue is adding on to the pattern, trying to improve the edges so it fits a little bit tighter. And then the idea being we'll take this, either make another pattern for another test dry fit, or we'll go straight from this perhaps to the carpet. I think the carpet, the whole blanket, is stretchable. It should work. This is the most challenging part of this headliner project here in the aft cabin. The issue is this thing here, this center porthole window. It's a bump out. It comes into the cabin this far on the sides over here, so it's not on the same plane as this, and it's not on the same plane of that. And what that means is you can't use one giant piece to go all the way across here because you have no way to get inside here. It will be wrinkled up down here on the bottom. That means you have to make a piece here, make a piece over there, have a piece in the center, and the center has to fold together in a certain way. That's what this is here. So it should look something like this. This goes up here. Get a little closer here and have that over my shoulder. Basically like that. That's the window. This comes down. This folds under. This piece then has to fold over. Boom, 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 boom. This will be a seam right here. And then this underneath here will all be a seam that comes up underneath here and is attached underneath. And that way, when you see these, when you come in, this will all be one piece. See what I'm saying? But this is contingent upon the seam marrying up properly. And of course the underseam, because you don't want it to be unsightly. Right? A lot of delicate stuff here. This seam here, all kind of stuff. So that's what's created this pattern here. This is something on another level. I feel like a tailor and I flunked out of fashion school. And at the same time that I was working on the aft cabin, well, I was also working on the forward cabin patterns and trying to figure out how they would go together. I'm more like a tailor right now than I am a boat builder. It's like I'm making a pair of new clothes for my trawler. So I'm in the V-berth. This is the pattern making stage for the headliner project. And this is the initial first step. We'll cut out a loosely measured piece of the FunStick material, this heavy duty contact paper. In this case, this is about 38 inches by about 98 inches. We peel the backing off of it and we stick it up here, almost like you're wrapping the boat. We start at the bottom, kind of worked our way up because this ends up being a very kind of a complex shape, and the surface, although it looks like it to the eye, is actually not flat. It goes across several different planes. One of the ways you can tell that is because we put the material up here and it's affixed to the bottom here, and as we wrap it around, you can see this bunching here on this material right here. And what that's an indicator is that this is not a straight kind of 90-degree wrap around the elbow here. It's actually three-dimensional in that, you know, this is further in than this. It's not a straight plane. This is actually, it's both bent and then wrapped around. And of course, the same thing is across the surface. So what all this means is that I think the choice of the hull blanket for headliner material is a particularly smart move. That material is very forgiving. It stretches all different directions. And if you did not have a material like that, say you had some type of indoor-outdoor carpet or some other type of material that was not capable of stretching in multiple planes in different directions, I could see you would conceivably have a problem trying to attach stuff to here. At some point, your headliner material has to be able to accept the shapes that are inside the cabin. And because we pulled out the old headliner and we're down to bare fiberglass, well, you know, none of this stuff is square. None of it is on the same plane. So this looks pretty rough right now, but I promise you, we'll be able to convert this basically into a paper pattern, and the paper pattern then transferred to the hull blanket headliner material. So this goes on here, goes up underneath here, but of course we have exposed backing plates for the stanchions. So we've got to make cutouts around those. I got to make cutouts around the cheater blocks. These cheater blocks are for the electrical panel, which goes right inside here. And we just do that, and as you work this material, you get a tighter and tighter pattern. Now, this is a kind of a multi-step process. I perfected it in the aft cabin, so we're going to follow the same procedure. We get up into the corner here. What's up in here? All right, so the question is so what do you do with this thing here where you're short? Well, remember, this is the initial pattern. The purpose of the FunStick pattern is to kind of map out the overall surface that we've got to cover with headliner material. We take the FunStick pattern and then we stick it to the brown paper, okay? Now we have something that's heavy duty, it won't tear, it can be moved around a little bit, it approximates the thickness of the headliner, and it's like a secondary rough pattern. We take that secondary rough pattern, we come back up here using little pieces of duct tape, we attach it up here, and then we kind of do our fine tuning. One of the things we do at this stage, well, one of the things you'll notice at this stage is that, so here I'm short here, right? And this will be easy to fix. Once we come back up with the paper pattern, we'll add blue tape on here, bring this in so that this is all proper shape. Even up all these broken edges, we'll reinforce any tears, we'll do all this stuff to kind of put everything together. We right now, we're just trying to get this to lay flat and get an idea of what the shape is going to be.
What do you do with the portholes during pattern making?
Someone asked a question about, do you cut the windows out now during the pattern making process? And the answer is no. Don't cut the windows out during this pattern making process. The purpose of marking the windows is so that when this is attached to the brown paper and you bring the whole thing back up as a secondary pattern, I can use the lines that I've drawn here to kind of feel if I'm inside the window. That tells me that I'm kind of in the ballpark centered on the surface for the pattern, right? You don't want to cut out the windows because the windows are quite large and they will weaken the overall pattern. And then you'll have multiple thinner areas that you've got to line up. You may as well just wait to the end, because you're not going to cut out the windows before you transfer this to the hull blanket material. You're going to just do one giant sheet of hull blanket, bring it up here, stick it on the bulkhead, and then you're going to take a knife and then trim out the portholes once everything is affixed here. All right, so at this stage, definitely don't cut out the portholes. We're just trying to get an overall kind of shape of what this pattern is going to look like. We're also trying to figure out, is it possible to make this whole thing out of one piece, or is it going to have to be glued? It's very possible. If you take a look at the way that this thing is shaped, it could, when it's flat on a surface, it could be this shape.
And then as you put it up here, it comes together like that, kind of like origami, you know, and that's what we're waiting to see. Once we pull this off here, put it on brown paper, that will tell us whether or not, you know, we have to have multiple pieces of material, or can we actually do it from one? Remember, the whole blanket stretchable, and we can kind of get it on there and maybe pull it to get it to cover this. That sure would make these corners and stuff here real nice. There'll be no seams. We want it seamless.
Why not just trim the whole blanket instead of all this pattern making? Now, I suppose one way to do it would be to have your whole blanket be extra large, and then you put it on there and you try and get into those corners and cut with a straight razor and get a straight line. But I'm here to tell you that's actually very, very difficult, especially if your boat does not have really tight, smooth corners. If you have a rough surface, when you drag that straight edge razor blade right down the corner there, well, it's not going to cut straight. It's going to go like this, and you're going to end up having a very jagged edge that goes, against the bulkhead. It'll be very, very obvious. So that's why I like cutting it beforehand. I use a really good pair of shears, and I can get a very, very straight edge. It's always easier to stretch the material, to accommodate something that's not quite square than it is to, try and cut it with a razor blade in the corner. I just haven't been able to get that to work very well. So it turns out we're going to have 2 extra pieces of headliner material inside the forward cabin. It's not just 3, it'll be a total of 5. There's 1 extra piece right there, and there's another extra piece right here. This right here will be an overhead panel that comes right through here. This overhead panel, it'll come right up to the edge there with a piece of trim. And of course the companionway will all be edged in with teak trim, finished out. If you're like me, it's at this point that you're probably wondering, how is all this going to come together? The idea of trying to hide multiple seams of the headliner material, someplace where it's not going to be so obvious and still look very professional, it just seemed like it was an impossible task. Despite the larger pieces, the forward cabin is actually easier than the aft cabin. It's the aft cabin that's really causing me some concern. Problem is, I just don't have any confidence that I'm going to be able to get these seams to come together and have this thing look any good. I've done 2 or 3 sets of patterns, and each time it's very obvious. There is no way to hide these seams. There's just too much going on. It's going to look like Frankenstein's face. So I'm trying to come up with what else can I do to hide the seams, but at the same time join all these pieces of headliner material together. The aft cabin has 9 pieces, and there's just no way to cover it up. Especially up under the aft cabin berths, there are some very complex curves and some corners that there's no way to have one piece of material cover that. It's going to take multiple pieces. The whole blanket will only stretch 5 or 10%, and I really need to be able to go 30, 40%. I'm going to have to come up with a solution to this. Otherwise, this is just never going to work. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about my solution to this very challenging project. Please leave a question or a comment below. Feel free to contact me via the email on the MotorCity Boat Werks website or on the homepage of my YouTube channel. I'll see you next time. Thanks for stopping by. Stay motivated.